This is The Engine Room, Home Church Scotland's leadership podcast. Leadership is the driving force behind any organisation. Thanks for joining us as we share some of the things that we've learned on our leadership journey. Alright, so we're in WisDUMB, and the kind of ideas that we're going to try to look back at some errors we've made and how we may have avoided said errors. We were struggling to find errors last night, weren't we, honey? No, that's true. No, I don't know. No, I was like, where do we start? So I'm going back to the start, really. The first big mistake I made in ministry was appointing the wrong people to positions. When I came here, it was a very small church, as you know. What I had was, I had a few words from God on what I was supposed to do. But what we can do as humans sometimes is take a word from God, and it is a word from God, but we rush it rather than chilling and waiting, if you know what I mean. So one of the instructions God gave me was really clear: build a church your kids would want to go to. I was like, okay, right, that was definitely from God. So I'd come in and found out really quickly, although it was a really small church, they were paying a lot of money to someone to clean it and look after the building. And we were renting out every weekend to people and paying someone a lot of money to come and sit in a room and do nothing while people were using the building. So I calculated it up and thought to myself, well, if we could just get the church to clean the building ourselves, I could actually afford a youth pastor part-time. That's how much money we were paying. So that was a good idea. I think it was a God idea. But I rushed the appointment, so there wasn't that many applications, actually, because nobody even knew who we were. And with all the respect in the world, why would a young person want to come here at that particular point in time? So I had an inkling. It was maybe not a great decision, but I was like, well, it's the only person that's applied that might not be terrible. Let's give it a go. That's because I wanted to build this church that my kids would want to go to. I wanted someone in that role, and so I rushed it, despite one or two warning signs or a wee bit of unpeace, and it became very, very evident very, very quickly that it was a really bad appointment. It just wasn't God's appointment, it was my appointment. Does that make sense? And then I done it again. And then I done it another half a time. And then we found Becca, which wasn't a rushed appointment, and that was a God appointment, and there was peace to that appointment. There was confirmations to that appointment. There was everything that you would want in an appointment with that. It was evidently God's time. And then, to be honest, every appointment we've made since then, like the Mike and Bev appointment, was really, really, really easy. I mean, I felt quite early on they've been sent here for a reason, but you sit on it. And then we had a conversation with them one day, and then they were like, because they were meant to be moving away, said, we really feel called to be part of the church. I was like, that's my confirmation, here's what I think. So I didn't push that, I waited until something came, and then we moved forward with it. Brian was someone that Brian hadn't been here a long time, and I felt like that's the guy. But I waited on someone else kind of confirming to me, by the way, he was on my team and he's the best guy I ever had in my team. I was like, right, okay, that's confirmation, and I've took my time. That's a good appointment. That's a God appointment, and so I'm going to do it. Asia was an easy appointment. Do you know what I mean? Because you're praying for something, you hear about something, you speak to the person, it falls into place, it makes sense. You get visas, you get doors open, and there's enough confirmations. You're like, that's a strong appointment. So rushing ahead of God is never a good idea. And even the best of us can rush ahead of God at times. The greatest men and women of God can rush ahead. And we see that even in Scripture. There's a number of examples in Scripture where godly men hello, push on ahead of God and do it their own way. Today I'm going to mainly look at Abraham. I was going to look at more, but there's that much to talk about in Abraham. We're just going to focus on Abraham and do that today. Now, Abraham was almost like the founder, if you like, the founding father of the children of Israel, of God's people. He was a phenomenal man of faith. He was a phenomenal man of God. Abraham knew what God's voice was. The Bible actually referred to Abraham as a friend of God. Like, I'd be friends with John Alford, do you know what I mean? And I know what John Alford sounds like, and I'll talk to John Alford and whatever, right? Abraham had a relationship like that with God, which we could all have, by the way, but it wasn't that common at the time, right? Abraham had this, so he knew what God's voice was, and more than that, he actually had experience of following God's voice. When God said, go, Abraham knew what that meant, and he went and done it. For example, when God came to Abraham and said, I want you to leave your homeland and everything you know, and go to this foreign land, Abraham went, all right then, and he done it, right? So he knew what God's voice was, he knew what obedience was, he knew all of that stuff. So in amongst that, God promised Abraham at this massive offspring, this massive lineage coming down from him, which is a fantastic promise, but except Abraham didn't have any kids. So how on earth is it, God, that you're going to do that when I don't have that? So again, if you're linking it to my position, I'm going to build a church. God's going to help me build a church that my kids would want to go to, but I've got nobody to look after the kids. So I'm going to try fix that. Do you know what I mean? So Abraham's right, God's promised me this big massive offspring, except I've got no kids. So what am I going to do about that? Abraham had an adopted son called Eliezer of Damascus. But when he questioned God, God said, like, that's not who your line's going to be through. That's in Genesis 15. So I'm going to read just a bit of that to give us a bit of background. So Genesis 15, verses 1 to 6, I think I'm going to read. So it says, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. He was called Abram at this time. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. Your reward, talking about your lineage and the children, you know, that's going to come through you. But Abram said, O Lord, it's really not a good idea to answer God back, but right, O Lord, but God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, behold, you've given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man, talking about Eliezer, will not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars if you're able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord and counted it to him as righteousness. So say to this guy that doesn't have any of his own kids, look at the stars in the sky, count them. That's as numerous as your offspring's going to be. And this is the crazy thing, right? It says Abraham believed the Lord. So we can believe God, and we can trust God, and we can have faith in God, and we can still get it wrong, right? We can believe Him, trust Him, all of that stuff, faith in that, but still go ahead of God. Because sometimes, somehow, we think God needs our help. I don't know why we think that, but... So again, you can be the mightiest man of God, you can be the mightiest woman of God, you can believe in God's promises, you can have experience in living through God's promises, you can have an incredible plan for your life through God's purposes, but you can still get things wrong. And often we get things wrong because even although we can be within God's plan and within God's will and know God and trust God and all of that stuff, we can still go through struggles in our life. We'll still have battles to fight. We'll still have strongholds to overcome because God does not ever promise us an easy ride. He promises that He'll be with us and that He'll bless us through every situation, through every storm, through every hardship. Sometimes He'll bless us in spite of what we're going through. But He doesn't promise us we won't go through stuff. So, like loads of us, Abraham and Sarah, godly men and women, had some issues to go through and some issues to deal with. One of them was called, well, the main one being barrenness. So Sarah was barren. So, like, how does that make sense? That someone that is this godly person that has an issue with that? And we know the same thing can sometimes be questioned today. God's always got a plan. So, Abraham and Sarah had year after year of expectation and disappointment. They disappointed time after time after time, year after year after year. And they've got this promise from God, your descendants are going to be like the stars in the sky, and they're going, but it's not looking like it. It's not looking like it. Now, if Abraham and Sarah, like people that knew God's voice to the degree that he did, can fall into this disappointing trap and all that, then my goodness, so can we. So Sarah had this Egyptian handmaid servant whose name was Hagar. And who knows that desperate folk sometimes do desperate, stupid things. So we need to be careful we're never desperate. So desperate for this heir to kickstart what God had promised, like desperate to move into God's promise at the earliest opportunity, Sarah convinced Abraham to take Hagar as like a second wife and have a child with her. I cannot imagine that being the answer to any problem that Ella would want to hit me with. I tell you what, Dave, just go and marry somebody else as well. And I had a mate once that married a second wife. He was from Iran. It was crazy. Anyway, he had lived 2 wives in his house. I don't understand that. I struggle enough with one. Although I've got a really good one. Anyway, Sarah's crazy idea, because she was desperate, was for Abraham to take a second wife, Hagar, who probably didn't have that much choice in the matter either, I have to say, and have a child with her. Now, having said that, it's important to point out that this was common practice back then, so it's not as, like to us today, that's like, oh my word, but back then it was actually fairly a normal thing. I'm not saying that makes it a right thing, but it was a fairly normal thing. The issue is that it was not what God had promised, and it was not God's plan, and it was not how God was going to deliver his promise. So what we need to understand as Christians and as people of God is that when God promises something, he's ordained when that's going to happen, and he has ordained how that's going to happen, as well as the why. So sometimes we get the why it's going to happen or the what's going to happen, and we try and work on the when and the how on our own. But if God's capable of the what and the why, he's capable of the when and the how. And we're supposed to we need to trust in his sovereignty, and we need to be patient. The Bible constantly tells us to be patient. Romans 12 verse 12, which we studied in great detail in the last engine room. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, and be constant in prayer. We're called to be patient. Romans 8:25, but if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. So when we hope for what we don't see, we wait for it in patience. We're called to be patient. Psalm 37 verse 7 to 9 says this: be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. Refrain from anger, forsake wrath. Fret not yourself, it tends only to evil, for evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait on the Lord shall inherit the land. So we have to be patient, and we have to wait on God. That's wisdom, waiting on God. But despite the calling Christians to be patient, we're not very good at it, are we? At times. And I know some of you are thinking, who you to talk, Dave? But I try with the whole patience thing. Sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm not so good. So this is the issue that Sarah had. She had an extreme lack of patience. God, in his sovereignty, had a when and had a how. And it wasn't time yet for God to reveal that and for God to make that happen. But like so many of us often do, Sarah wanted to force the issue. And you can figure out the science and the how. I'm not going to go into it. But 9 months later, Abraham had a son. He was called Ishmael. But not by his wife, by this second wife, Hagar. And when we do things on our own devices, when we rush ahead of God, when we push things, when we force things, when we don't wait on God, often there are consequences that we have to deal with as a result of that. And sadly for this child, there was consequences. An angel of the Lord warned that he would be a wild man and every man's hand would be against him. Now, that's not because God didn't like him. Actually, God was faithful to him. That's because of Sarah's actions, which I'll cover very, very shortly. So Abraham got a son, but it wasn't the heir that God had promised. The heir that God promised came 24 years later, when Sarah was way too old to conceive, but despite that, God did a miracle. And as promised, everything that God said would happen, happened. Abraham at this point in time is 100 years old. Lawrence, I think you're the oldest man in the room. Do you fancy having another kid? No. 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 Yeehaw, right? It's not, no. Do you know what I mean? No. Right. I don't fancy having one at 42. I was 42 this week. It's not good. Well, that, you know, is 100 years old. It's no possible. His wife was old, and not only was his wife old, she was old and had been barren for her whole entire life. But our human restrictions and inabilities are nothing to God. And they're nothing against God's promises. If God has said something, that's what's going to happen. So at the appointed time, 24 years after Abraham and Sarah got their own conclusions and pushed it, this son Isaac was born. And then again, like I said, sadly, cut a long story short, Sarah got very jealous of the other son and protective of her own son, and she forced Hagar and this son out to live in the wilderness on their own, which is not very fair, is it? Considering it was her that pushed this and fabricated and made this whole situation. And then they find themselves in this really, really horrible situation. But again, it's easy to go, that's blooming shocking, and it is shocking and it's disgraceful. But when we do things on our own, we mess up. When we push things, we mess up. And when we mess up, there's consequences. And they're hard consequences. This promised heir was going to happen. And it still happened. But because of not waiting on God, because of not being patient, because of not trusting God to fulfill his promises in his ways and in his timing, Abraham had to effectively get rid of one of his sons, which must have been pretty hard on him as well. Not easy. Trying to speed up God's timetable is never a sensible thing to do. And not only do we see Abraham and Sarah try to take matters into their own hands, we see Abraham demonstrating an extreme lack of leadership over his household by neglecting what God had promised and operating outside of that. If you're a leader, and a lot of engine rooms about kind of leadership, if you're a leader, you listen to God and only to God. You don't listen to anybody else. And you please God and only God, and you don't try and please anyone else. Like from the beginning of time, any time someone has not listened to God and listened to somebody else, they've messed up. If you look at Adam, God said, don't touch the tree. His wife said, let's eat the tree. And Adam went, are you okay then? And look at the state that happened since then. When you try and please someone, listen to someone, put someone before God, you're in trouble. So there's another bit of wisdom for you. You don't follow God, you follow man. Following God is wisdom. Following man is dumb. So we can't ignore an instruction from God, no matter how loud someone shouts, no matter how hard someone tries to persuade you, no matter how many threats or promises or manipulations or whatever comes. We listen to God and we don't waver from it. And sometimes we run ahead of God. Sometimes the reason we run ahead of God is because we fool ourselves into this stupid position of thinking that God needs our help. So here's a really, really bit of important wisdom for you. God does not need your help. I assure you that God does not need your help. He doesn't need your help, and he certainly does not need you to disobediently and impatiently run ahead of him and mess your future up and mess his plans up and mess his ideas up. God just doesn't need that. Waiting in God, trusting in God can be challenging, but running ahead of God can be disastrous. Right? So I'd rather have a challenging time than a disastrous time. In an attempt to run ahead of God and to be the big man and to fix things and to sort things and to take things into your own hands, most of the time you'll end up losing your peace, you'll waste your time, you'll waste money, you'll waste resources, And you'll often, almost always, be faced with pretty serious consequences due to not trusting in God's timing. Now, despite all that I've said, praise God, He's gracious. I mean, else we'd all be stuffed, right? God's merciful. His grace is abounding, right? He's slow to anger, praise God. And even when we face consequences of running ahead, we can still see His grace. So there was consequences for Abraham. He lost a son. There was consequences for the handmaid. There was consequences for her son. But God showed immense favour and still included him in a promise, even though the promise wasn't initially for him. God still included him in that, because God knows that we're dafty sometimes, and God knows that often at times we will not display wisdom, but we'll display dumbness. The Bible says that we all like sheep have gone astray, and God knows that. And when we go astray, He shows His grace. But despite that, we would still save ourselves from a whole lot of inconvenience if we just had wisdom and waited in God and trusted in God. So I say that to say, don't be discouraged if you find yourself just now in a situation where you've ran ahead with God. Somebody might be watching online freaking out or whatever, I don't know. People in the room, I don't know. If you find yourself in a position where you've gone ahead of God and you're struggling now with consequences, then press into His grace, because it's available. But in future, let's try and do better and not run ahead of God. Our job is to have wisdom, to wait in God, to wait in His instructions, and to make the right call. So what does it mean to wait in God? What does it mean to wait on the Lord? In a sentence, I would say it means to patiently trust in Him and follow His guidance. It's patiently trust in God and follow His guidance. And it also means waiting until you're strong enough to do what He's asked us to do. Because often we'll get a promise, but we're not strong enough. That could be strong enough in person, or like from a church perspective, God could say we've got a promise to do something, but if we're not strong enough in body, we're not strong enough in team, we're not strong enough in finance, we're not strong enough in a certain area, then we wait for God to strengthen us so we can move. Isaiah 40 talks a lot about waiting in God. I'm going to read that from verse 9 to the end, actually. It's quite a long passage, so it'll be on the screen. But if you want to follow me, you can. Isaiah 40. Beautiful passage of scripture. So it says, "Go on up to a high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem, herald of good news. Lift it up, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Behold, the Lord comes with might, and His arm rules for Him. Behold, His reward is with Him, and His recompense before Him. He will tend His flock like a shepherd. He will gather." Sheep and herd was in a different line for me. That's where I came from. I don't understand one of them little dashes, right? So it looked like two different words. He will gather the lambs in His arms. He will carry them in His bosom and gently lead those that are with young. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of His hands, and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance? Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord, or what man shows Him His counsel? Whom did He consult, and who made Him understand? Who taught Him the path of justice, and taught Him knowledge, and showed Him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust in the scales. Behold, He takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before Him. They are accounted by Him as less than nothing and emptiness. To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness compare with Him? An idol, a craftsman casts out, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts for its silver chains. For who is too impoverished for an offering? He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is He who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers? Who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in? Who brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness? Scarcely they are planted, scarcely sown, scarcely is their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these, who brings out their host by number, calling them by name. The greatness of his might, because he is strong in power, not one is missing. Who do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might he increases his strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall be exalted. For they who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with eagles' wings. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not grow faint. So Isaiah 40 tells us to wait on the Lord. But really, really importantly, it tells us the Lord that we're waiting on and we're waiting for. It tells us that even young, fit people and strong people will experience exhaustion and an end to their strength. So we need to wait and rely on God for his help. So I'm going to give a really quick summary because that was a lot of reading there. So it tells us that God measures all the waters of the earth in the palm of his hand. Right? That's nuts, isn't it? Measures all the waters of the earth in the palm of his hand. That's how powerful God is. And he collects every particle of dust on the earth in a basket. He knows the exact weight of the mountains, of the hills, of the islands. It says he sits on a throne above earth, watching us, and he dwells in a tent made from the canopy of the heavens. It says he causes earthly rulers to wither with his breath. It says he brings out the stars each night by calling them by name. So this is the God that we're waiting on. It's not a God of insignificance. It's a God of significance. It's a God of power. It's a God of might. It's a God of wonder. And we wait on him because he can do things that we can't do. And he can accomplish things that we can't do. And we wait on him, as that good song that I'm liking at the moment says, because he is God and we are not. So it's important that we wait on God and trust him to lead us to the right decision at the right time in his ways, exactly as he wants it to be. So how do we do that? So how do we make godly decisions? How do we make sure that before we press go on something, then it's God and not us? That's a really difficult one. And obviously, the longer you do life with God, and because of God's grace, when we make mistakes, he forgives us, and we keep maturing and we keep learning. So a lot of it is, in some ways, is I don't make as many mistakes as I used to make because I've already made them and I've learned off them. So the definition of a dumb person is someone who makes the same mistake time and time again and doesn't change anything. So the important thing is when we make a mistake, we change and go, where did that mistake come from? But there's a really nice verse in James 3 verse 17 that gives me some pointers for making decisions, and I try and run decisions through the filter of this verse. It says, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. So that's what wisdom from above is: pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial and sincere. The word pure, translated from the Greek, the Greek word is hagne, which means undivided. We're getting wisdom from God. It's undivided wisdom. There'll not be wee bit of doubt and a wee bit of. Does that make sense? So when I make these appointments, I had a little bit of doubt, but my want to fill a role outweighed the doubt. So I overlooked the doubt because I wanted to make an appointment, and I made the appointment, but the doubt was there for a reason. Whereas if I give you Becca, Mike, Bev, Asia, Brian, anyone, any appointment since these mistakes, I've had zero doubt about them, not one. If I have 5% of doubt on a decision, it's not happening. So that's how like strong-willed really that I've come to know. Unless I'm 100% sure that this is what God's doing, like, we're not going to do it. I mean, now that doesn't even mean that all the things I plan to do will work. Even although I'm 100% sure that's what God's, doesn't mean it'll work. So like if I use the building, for example, up the road, I was 100% convinced we were to go for that, right? Now, we didn't get it. But I don't think I was right to go. I don't think I was wrong in the going for it because of the things that were learned in the going for it that are going to help us for the future, and it raised faith levels in our church, and like it set something in rolling that's going to eventually get us to where we're going to be. So it's not to say everything I ever say is going to be absolutely fine and work. That's not what I'm saying. But if there's a wee bit of doubt, if I'm divided in any way in the decision's not happening. Does that make sense? That's what it means by pure. It says that it's peaceable. Peace is the opposite of desperate. So if I'm desperate, I'm not doing it. Do you know what I mean? Because it's possible that it's me and not God. So if I know there's a desperateness in me, I'm going to sit in that until I'm not feeling desperate anymore and I'm feeling peace. Now that might seem a bit silly, because I know when you feel like you're desperate to do something, it's like you really want to do it. So like I really want a pastor for Carmyle, right? But there is probably a verge of desperateness on that right now, so I'm not doing nothing. I'm just going to sit until God shows me who it is, and I've not got any doubt about it. You know what I mean? And we'll be fine. We're going to, because the worst thing you could do is out of desperateness put the wrong person in. Then your church is finished, right? Then your plans, then everything's gone. You've got to sit in that place of peace. So if you don't have peace about a decision, it is absolutely not from God. If you don't have peace about how you're going to step forward, it is not from God. So peace is the barometer. Where are your peace levels at? I had crazy peace about marrying Ella. Do you know what I mean? I've had crazy peace. We had crazy peace about coming to this church. Even though it didn't make sense, we had crazy peace about it. When you've got peace, you can move. When you're desperate, or you can't move, right? So, pure, peaceable, then it says gentle. Gentle is the opposite of pressure. You know what I mean? So, gentleness, like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, gentleness, I'm touching this Bible with gentleness, right? If I'm touching it with pressure, I'm like, see, pressure crushes and gentleness eases. So if you're feeling something crushing you, then it's not a good decision. If you're feeling weight, like I've got to make this decision because of the weight that's on me. Whether that, quite often it's weight of other people's expectations. Quite often it's weight of like I'm not doing a good enough job, or like I don't know. But if you're feeling weight, financial weight of expectation, then I'm not making a decision out of weight, because it will probably be the wrong decision every single time. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to trust God to lift the burden, to lift the weight. So I'm in a place of peace, and then I'm feeling gentle and I'm feeling rested, and then I know I'm able to make a decision. And if I make a decision from that place of just gentleness, sitting with God, it's probably the right decision. Am I making sense? So I'm waiting, and we're checking: is it 100% sure? Is it undivided? Is there peace in this? Is there gentleness in this? And then it says open to reason. Or another version would say reasonableness, right? A decision's got to be reasonable. Now, if I give you an example, God won't lead you to do something that's going to harm someone else, because that would be unreasonable, right? So for example, when I felt called to come to this church, which didn't make sense because we were in a good church and this was a struggling church, and we had a strong youth and this didn't have any youth, and we had 3 youths, and it was a whole ton of the decision didn't make any sense, right? But I felt I was to come here, said nothing about it, and Ella separately felt like she had to come here, right? So we both knew this was in our plan. There was peace, there was calmness, there was gentleness, there was all of that stuff. Now, if Ella desperately did not want to come here and hadn't heard from God we were to come here, and it was going to be the worst thing in our marriage if I dragged my wife kicking and screaming to a church, that would not have been reasonable for me to say, I don't care how you feel, I believe this is right, and therefore I'm going to do it. Then that decision's unreasonable. Does that make sense? So if it's unreasonable, I'm not doing it. That doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with you all the time, but it means that But that would have been an unreasonable one. Do you understand? So we need to make sure, is the decision a reasonable decision? If it's a reasonable decision, I can go ahead with it. And then it says, full of mercy and good fruit. So what will the fruit of my decision be? Will this decision result in an increase in souls? Will it result in a church strengthening? Will it result in a strength going? Or will it cause harm and upset and division? If it's the latter, we're not moving. If it's the former, we're going to move. And then lastly, it says impartial and sincere. And impartial is important. When trying to make a decision for God, you're trying to get yourself to a place where you're impartial. And what I mean by that is I'm not trying to please that person and I'm not trying to please that person. I'm just trying to please God. So often, and it's really, really difficult in church leadership, when you know you're going to make a decision or make an announcement or move forward, I could tell you before I make that decision and announcement exactly who's going to come back at me and what they're going to come back at me with. I know it every single time, and I'm very, very seldom wrong. I can tell you that person, they're going to come back and complain about that. This is the problem they're going to have, because you kind of know where folks at. So what happens, and what's the mistake a lot of churches make, is the pastors are preaching to the minority. And what I mean is I'm preaching so as not to upset that person, not pointing at anyone, I'm pointing at that chair. Right? I'm preaching to not upset person A, because if I upset them, they're going to shout at me, they're going to send me an email, they're going to moan at me, they're going to this, they're going to that. So it's like, it's not worth saying what I feel God's told me to say, because I can't be bothered with the fallout. So we don't do it. So therefore, we're not making a decision, and we're not speaking impartially. We're being partial to that person's wants and desires and bad attitudes and negativity rather than God. Am I making sense? So I'm not making a decision because that person's going to love me for it, and I'm not making a decision because that person's going to hate me for it. I'm impartially, I've got no agenda, God. What's your will? What do you want me to do? That's what it means by impartial. And sincere basically just means without hypocrisy. Does saying this or doing this make me a hypocrite based on what I'm preaching? Is this decision against the word of God? Is this decision is this a Christian decision to make? If it's a hypocritical, unsincere decision, then I'm not going to make it. So I try and run my decisions through those lenses. And if they ticks all of them boxes, I'm like, I'm feeling good about this. This is a God decision. And if it doesn't tick all of those boxes, I'm not doing it. And this is the thing about being a Christian and like trying to lead a church for me, or whatever position of leadership you might be in, or leading a family, or in the workplace, or whatever it is. The Bible tells us how to make good decisions. So we actually I often refer to the Bible as a winner's manual. That's because it's a winner's manual. If we read it and understand it and apply it, we're going to win. If we read it and understand it and apply it, we're going to succeed. There's a winner's manual on how to make decisions. Where I've got wrong is when I haven't ran everything through that. And even it might tick some of the boxes, but not all of the boxes. And you make a wrong decision, you're going to be faced with consequences. But there's no reason for home church ever to make a poor decision, because we've got scripture to guide us through it. Doesn't mean everyone in the church is going to agree with my decisions, but it means I can stand before God and answer to him and believe I've been faithful to him in the decisions that I'm putting into practice. So I hope that's been useful today. Don't go ahead of God. Chill yourself out. Patiently wait on God to speak and God to move, and then wait on him to fulfill those things. Now, sometimes within that fulfillment, we have to move, but we wait on God telling us to move. We don't just sit and, you know what I mean? There's a point in the process where we have to do something or to move or to be obedient, but we wait on God, we wait on God, we wait on God. We show patience, we trust in him, we understand he's greater than us. We run our things through the biblical lens, and hopefully we'll continue to make good decisions. And hopefully everyone can agree the last 4 or 5 big decisions we've made from church have been good. I think as a church we've made some really, really good decisions, if I'm honest. I'm not saying that pure check us out, because they're no decisions, it's God decisions. But we have learned, as a leadership, we've learned how to listen to God, which is why in 6 years or 5 years since we became home church. I'm not going to tell any lies. 5 years since we became home church, and I was able to appoint my own team of leaders. We've never once had a disagreement. We've never once had an argument. There's never once been raised voices. There's not been even the hint of a ding-dong, because we make godly decisions in a godly way together. So if you you're not going to have any troubles. You're not going to make bad calls, and you're not going to have arguments. There's no division in the decisions. Does that all make sense? So I hope that helps. So thank you guys for watching online. I trust that's been beneficial today. Sorry if I laboured on at certain points, but I hope that's been all right. We're going to head to a Q&A now in the room, and I'll try answer some questions. So bless you guys. We'll see you next week. Feel free to join us in person, but keep joining online if you can. Bless you. Thanks.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us for the Engine Room. Why not follow or subscribe to this podcast, and feel free to do the same to our social media pages as well as our YouTube channel. Find out more about our church at homechurchscotland.org.